From Austin, Texas for another live webinar series. Joined by Keith, my buddy Keith. This has become quite a regular thing, having coffee together, discussing topics near and dear to our heart. We're excited today to talk to you about Alibi Cloud and traditional systems. And really, this is another webinar series where we're going to try to help you guys approach selling solutions in a better manner, right? I think what we've heard from a feedback perspective from our dealer partners is you guys want to understand how to approach selling cloud, when to sell cloud, what the right opportunities are to sell cloud. So today, we're going to talk a lot about multi-site and multi-user applications as it relates to traditional solutions and Alibi Cloud VS. So we appreciate Keith being here. He's going to be doing a lot of the talking today because he spent a lot of time, not just on Alibi Cloud, but in the industry, and really understands the ins and outs of how you really help your customers understand the right applications, the right time to decide between a traditional and a cloud-based solution. So before we get into kind of the technical aspects and kind of compare and contrast the two, multi-user, multi-site considerations are really, really important, right? Anytime you go talk to a customer, you're talking to them, having an initial conversation about a security solution, the multi-user and multi-site conversation should come up, right? Because it really helps dictate the type of solution you're going to recommend and ultimately the final solution that you're going to implement. You're really going to want to ask those probing questions. Again, this goes back to the Sales 101 that we talked about on our last webinar, and those probing questions are really, really key. You want to talk to them about where they're going to be installing the solution. Are they going to have the solution installed in one site, or is it going to be really a multi-site installation? You want to understand their user base. Are they going to have one person accessing the system, or are they going to have multi-users accessing the system? How are they going to be accessing the system? Are they going to be doing it at the location where the solution's installed, or are they going to be doing that remotely? And if they're going to be doing it remotely and they're going to have multiple users, then you really need to understand how they want to simplify or manage those users as well. So those probing questions kind of get you down the path of what type of solution you're ultimately going to recommend to that customer. So as we go into the multi-site considerations, I'm going to let Keith kind of talk about traditional versus cloud and how you kind of get down the path of what solution to recommend.
Yeah, so when you think about installing any recording solution, you're going to have a recording engine somewhere. So when we think about traditional NVRs, the way the graphic shows here on the presentation is you're going to have a recorder that's going to be installed at a physical store. If you have multiple, you're putting a recorder per store. Mm-hmm. And then those stores basically can be centrally controlled through a piece of software that usually exists. We have that for Alibi traditional recorders with our ACMS. But essentially how that works is you have a remote PC, you're going to log in for all the information into that one PC, into that piece and that software, and now you're accessing every NVR. But the way to think about this is when you're accessing an NVR, you're accessing every store. So you're not just going to one centralized place to get control or video streaming in, you're actually hitting all your locations. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the big differences between going traditional or cloud. So as I'm trying to say access a store in California, I'm dialing into that store. Right. You can still do that. You're going to run into certain limitations on what the software can handle. So while we can do multi-site management with traditional, we have a device limit, we have a channel limit, mm-hmm. And that's going to kind of creep up really fast depending upon the number of cameras you have at each location, or the total number of recorders that you might have. Right. And right now those limits are based around 256 recorders or a total of 1,024 channels. Once you get beyond that, you're running kind of to the limits of the software, and then you would need a second PC to actually be able to manage additional stores. So you kind of have to then look at two pieces of hardware you're managing, right, if you wanted to have it all in kind of one place, and it's not at that point one place. Right. When we go to cloud, the biggest difference is all of your cameras stream directly to a centralized recording solution. So they go to the data center from one store or from multiple. All access is actually done at the data center level. So at this point, the cameras get up there, the stream's encrypted, the video's stored there, and the management suite is running on just supercomputing servers, that run in that center. So whenever I'm actually sitting somewhere accessing my cloud solution, I'm never actually dialing into each store.
Right.
I'm dialing into the data center. So one, I get to take advantage of the bandwidth at the data center. I'm not worried about going to each store and worrying about that. I'm also keeping each site a little more secure because I'm also not worried about going back into each location. I don't have people dialing in to the firewall at each store. I'm going directly to that data center. And so the encryption that we have is not just for the cameras, it's for the camera streaming, it's for the video being stored, the connection from my PC, that's an encrypted transmission to see the video. So it inherently just kind of makes it easier, faster to access, and you get one window pane. And because you're taking advantage of how data centers kind of can cluster servers, we don't have a limit on the number of cameras we can add. We don't have a limit on the number of sites.
Right.
So if you have one store, the security aspect's there, but it easily scales now when you go up. So if you think about kind of the summary here of what we had, channel counts are going to be fixed per recorder. So when you think about multi-site, cost is always something you want to bring into it. You want to make sure you're budgeting out what the customer is going to need now and in the future.
Right, and that's an important consideration. Right?
Absolutely.
We need to ask the question, because we know customers get a security solution in place, they love the way it performs, and you build an 8-channel, 8-camera system, and then they want to add more cameras, then you're kind of stuck from a channel count perspective.
Exactly. So you've got to kind of ask those questions up front, standard questions. Are you going to expand or are you not?
Right.
The hard part is people may always change their mind.
That's right.
So it's
they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, it's like I need 8 cameras, and then they realize they need 12.
Right.
Now they have to budget additional money to upgrade the recorder and to add those cameras. You're not just adding cameras; you have to upgrade the whole system.
Right.
You get unlimited channels and cameras with the cloud. You just pay a subscription fee for that, and we upgrade the sites real easy. A big thing on multi-site is how we manage storage. So in a traditional way, every recorder has a hard drive. So all your evidence, if you've got a nationwide chain, all your evidence is decentralized at each store. So you have to worry about securing all of those recorders, all of those hard drives. You have to hope they're all healthy. It's hard to get a single glance unless you've got some sort of a management tool that can do that. Because we centralize the storage in cloud, it's just easier to see. One, you don't have to worry about the hard drive health. We take care of that for you. We offer, redundant backup of all the videos. So if a drive does fail, we take care of it. It's failover. You're going to have the video there. That's kind of the promise of moving to a paid model.
Right.
Location management, again, you're going to have a limited multi-site architecture based upon the CMS software and what it can provide. Remember, the software it's a powerful software suite. I'm not going to say the ACMS doesn't work well. It does. But again, it's part of an included free service with that traditional package. So we can only do so much whenever we don't charge for that type of development work. With cloud, that just comes with the subscription. So we can do a lot more with how we scale up for customer use. And then overall management from just firmware and cybersecurity. So if you've got 300 locations and I have to update 300 sites all individually, it becomes very cumbersome. It makes it harder on whoever's doing that work, whether that be the management person at the company that owns the system, or whether it be a dealer integrator that actually is doing a maintenance agreement.
Right.
You're going to have to go to each one individually to update those systems. With cloud, we update the system in the back end for you. It's automatically done because it's one centralized platform. Cameras, we push firmware out to the cameras. That's a trigger that you'll get notified for in the app or in the desktop client. You get to choose to do that, but you're not having to search for anything. It's automatic notifications. And that's just because the notification engine, again, it's centralized. So,
with traditional, you have to know the firmware's been issued. You got to go out and grab it. You got to go out and physically touch all those boxes, right? And when I think about those various aspects, whether it's the ongoing maintenance piece, future proofing, we've talked about total cost of ownership in some of our other webinars, right? That total cost of ownership on the traditional side, if you're doing a really good job of future proofing, of building in the maintenance pieces as well, actually could present a higher initial cost of investment to the customer than the cloud side, right? So, and on the cloud, you get all the automatic benefit of all those things being automatically updated. It's done for you versus you having to manually go out and search and find and install.
Correct. Yeah, and we're doing things to try to make firmware updates easier across the board. It's just always going to be a little bit more difficult with traditional. And that is even if we're able to, and we're able to actually pull down firmware now from a cloud server. But when you do that, you have to check for the update manually still. I can't do a proactive notification out to the embedded device. And when you do the update, we have to take the recorder offline. And that's something that we don't run into with cloud because the cloud runs on multiple failover servers. So as we update, another one's running your engine.
No disruption.
There's no disruption.
Service. Right.
So it just it becomes a more seamless kind of maintenance piece.
Gotcha. So when we talk about cloud versus traditional, and we're going to specifically talk about cloud now, when we talk about some of those applications, right? Where are we finding, because we're talking to our dealer partners, our customers here, where are they finding kind of traction with selling the cloud solution from a multi-site perspective?
Yeah. So, retail is a great one. You have a small retail chain that's spread across, state, city, region. It's easy to have all those cameras go to one centralized platform. Yep. You manage it all from one place. Mm-hmm. That's one that is just an easy home, and it keeps you in compliance because of the security with like PCI and stuff like that. So it makes it a pretty easy choice as long as you've got the infrastructure in place to support it. Other ones, daycare facilities, where you've got a lot of people wanting to dial in at the same time. That becomes one, and you've got chains to where you've got little Montessori schools, and they want to keep everything up together and working with credential and site management. Schools that have multiple campuses.
Yeah, campuses, right?
Multiple campuses. Right. They may not have those interconnected via a dedicated LAN or VLAN set up. We can set up the cameras at multiple buildings, facilities, or schools that have that may be in place. They're older. They have internet maybe at a building, but they don't necessarily have LAN connectivity back at a building, and you may not. You could always try to do bridged networks where you've got wireless links going from a building to extend. Sometimes that's just not possible. You may have trees or other buildings in the way that aren't yours. This allows you to kind of take advantage of that without having to rerun architecture. Just all we need is an internet connection for the cloud.
Well, see, I think that's an important part, right? When you think about enterprises, schools, governments that have multiple locations, right? Or they start at one central campus and then they expand over time, and maybe they have an annex location. Adding those is super easy because you don't have to worry about wireless transmission back to the main hub where that recorder is located, or digging fiber, digging a hard line over to that location to get it back to the recorder, right? As sites get added, to your point, it's just an internet connection that we're looking for. You add cameras, you connect it to that internet connection, and then you add it to that one account. So it's really become super, super easy, right?
It's extremely helpful with citywide deployments. There's lots of cities that start adding building annexes around the city.
Right.
They're not going to be able to run dedicated cabling back.
From everywhere.
From everywhere. Or, we have cities here in Texas that want to put cameras up around the town. They may have 40-foot oak trees throughout the whole town, which they're not going to put, an 80-foot tower at every site trying to do wireless backhauls. Right. It's just not cost effective compared to just throwing a camera up somewhere, getting an internet drop, and kind of just rolling with the subscription.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I think the dealers that we're finding have the most traction are really doing a great job of asking those probing questions to understand the multi-site aspects of any given solution. And again, where they find that the customer have needs where cloud really fills that solution really well, it's an easy decision to make because the customer has flexibility to add sites at will. They can add cameras. They're not constrained by camera count. So, we're excited because as we're working with our dealer partners, we're actually publishing a lot of case studies and success stories around cloud that tie into the multi-site. Now, you had mentioned when we were talking about some of the multi-site applications, there's also some multi-user when we talk about daycares and nursing homes and stuff like that. Multi-user is also one of those critical things that we need to understand when we're talking to our customers to really get a good understanding of how many people are going to want to access the system, not just on premise, but how many people are going to want remote access, right? And when we talk about traditional and cloud, I think there's some really clear differentiators that will help our customers, our dealer partners, understand when to talk to their customers about cloud.
Yeah, so every recording solution is going to have the ability to make more than one user. The question is a matter of where do those credentials live, and then how many users can you create? Some of the recorders that we sell only offer 6 total credentials. So you have 6 unique users. Now you could share those users out, which of course is never a good practice. You don't want to have to worry about giving people the same password and username. Excuse me. Some of them go up to 32. which is what most of our traditional Alibi recorders, they have a 32 user limit. Beyond that, you're kind of at the point, again, sharing credentials if you want people to have access. With cloud, we have unlimited. So if you look at, sorry, go back one slide. So if you look at this slide, what we're going to call out here is we have got a lot of remote users. This can be on the same local area network. It could be external to the building. All these users can be created. But what this graphic kind of points to is they all live at this NVR. So if we move to a remote multi-site system, if I've got 4 locations and I've got 6 users and I want these 6 users to have access to all 4 locations, you're setting up 4 duplicate credentials in every location.
So even though they're the same credential at each NVR, so you're managing 24, what's the word I'm looking for? Like instances of credentials.
Correct.
Right.
So like if I make you a user on one of these NVRs, I have to make a user on NVR 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I have to remember that I made that user on NVR 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Right.
Now the CMS that we pull in, you can bring in all these locations and see them all in one place. But the credential management is still done one at a time.
At each box.
At each box. And I can access those boxes remotely to kind of set those users up, but I have to do it one at a time. There's no way for me to say, I want Chris to have access to site 1, 2, 3, and 4. I want him to have these permissions and I want to do it in one nice point and click. Traditional systems don't have that. We don't have that management capability.
Gotcha.
And what is really tricky is, what if I only wanted you to have access on 3 of the systems? Now I have to remember which 3 I gave you access to. And which one I did not.
Right.
So you got to keep a rolling matrix, kind of a list, a spreadsheet, whatever it is, right? And you're sitting there making sure that I know, all right, I know all these guys have access to this system.
Right.
Here's the permission level I gave.
And that's critical, because if one of the NVRs for some reason fails, and then you have to go install a new box and then redo the credentials, you have to understand who was credentialed into that box and who didn't, and just it's a lot to keep track of.
Exactly. Right? So it's while the ability to have all these credentials there is prominent, it's just it's decentralized.
Gotcha.
So when we move to cloud, I create a user. That user, then it's checkbox logic on what you can do, when you have access to the system, what cameras you can see from any location. I grant that credential, hit apply, and that pushes down to all of those. So when they log into their mobile app or their client, their permission, their boxes, type of camera they have shows up. Now, if I need to check and see, oh, what do you have permission for? I can go back to the client. I can look and see what systems I gave you access to, and it's one pane to look at. You're not looking at multiple systems. It's just, here's a list of everything I've told you can do. So knowing who has permission to what, creating the credential, deleting the credential, it's a lot easier to manage. And I'm not bound by a number. So, I could make 1,000 users on cloud account if I wanted to. It doesn't matter to us. I don't have a processing limit. And part of that comes down to not just, it's not really a processing limit on that we couldn't build out a bigger database of users. It's accessing systems in a traditional fashion. You're bound by certain processing limitations of the recorder. So it's not just that the users are decentralized, access to those is decentralized. So whenever I want to look at a recorder off site, I've got to pull bandwidth out of that box. The box has a bandwidth limit. So most people don't realize that when you look at a traditional recorder, you're worried about how much camera traffic comes in, but how much camera traffic goes out. And that outbound limit could be as low as 16 concurrent video streams. It can be as high as 128. But once you get, say, to 128 streams, so if I've got 8 users, I've got a 16 channel box, that's all 8 users looking at all 16 cameras at the same time. The moment I want to add a 9th user and they want to see a camera, you better hope that one of those other users isn't looking at a camera, or they're going to get a message saying no more streams are available. So that's another limitation, I should say, of the traditional, is we can only pump out so much video before the CPUs and those machines they can't take it.
And that applies whether it's at a single location.
Absolutely.
Or, from a multi-user single location to a multi-user multi-location, it kind of works the same way, right?
Yeah. So, when you think about accessing one box, that's bandwidth coming out. And if you access 3, that's bandwidth coming out of each one, but each box has a limit. So it's not necessarily just a multi-site limit. You've got to look at it in a single application, is how many users are going to concurrently access the box at one time. You also run into, it's concurrent streams, but it's also bandwidth. So, you've got to balance those two a little bit more heavily in a traditional system,
Gotcha.
especially with a big user base.
Yeah, for sure. So really understanding how many people are going to be accessing and then using it at the same time are really important. So let's kind of look at our table that kind of shows the comparison.
Yeah. So, these are the summarized key call outs here. When we look at concurrent viewing with cloud, we can do unlimited concurrent viewing. So we're not bound by that limit on number of streams. And that is because whenever we access the cloud, I'm pulling one stream from the camera to the cloud. The cloud then multicasts that out to all the users. So I'm not having to repeat that stream over and over and over again, which is why we can do it.
Right.
With traditional, it's going to be limited, and that's based upon the box. Some NVRs, again, on the lower channel counts, they have fewer concurrent streams. Most of the 16 channels and above are going to give you up to 128 concurrent streams. And there's ways, we have software to try to create that, to make that bigger. It just requires additional hardware. You have to have, an additional media server to be able to multicast. Users have to be at the same location to take advantage of that.
Okay.
So there's just some implementation things that you have to take into consideration.
Right. It's a little more involved to make that
Very
happen
much.
with the traditional system.
In terms of the remote access bandwidth is one that we talk about a lot with cloud because there's a difference. When we think about accessing a traditional recorder, we call, it's limited based upon the recorder. So for instance, an 8-channel NVR that we sell, it can handle, 80 megs of bandwidth coming in, 160 megs going out. So you have to make sure that you're not going to be exceeding that bandwidth limit of the outgoing for concurrent users.
Right.
And then with cloud, though, it's unlimited. We're hitting the data center.
Right.
The thing I like to call out on that too, though, is a lot of people think that cloud is more bandwidth intensive. And I should say the difference is remote access bandwidth for traditional, it's on-demand bandwidth. So when we want to access my recorder, it's at my store, I'm not pulling external ISP bandwidth like upload speed until someone wants to look at cameras. Once we stop looking at cameras, that bandwidth goes down and it's kind of waiting. It goes back and it's there. With cloud, we are streaming full time to the cloud. So you do have to have more ISP upload speed on a regular basis. But the difference comes down to how people are accessing it. So if I've got 10 users and it's 1 meg per camera to see those cameras off site, when I log into a traditional system, say it's 8 cameras, 8 megs times 10. I'm pulling 80 megs upload speed at that point, trying to look at those cameras in a traditional sense, all at that customer site. So their ISP speed is going to go through the roof, or you're going to have a very poor experience. In terms of laggy video, artifacting, freezing of the video frames, because they just don't have the speed to support the load. With cloud, we have anywhere from 128K to 2 megs a camera based on your settings. That's full time to the cloud. But if I've got, say, 8 cameras, I've got them throttled down to, say, 512 or 8 meg. That's 8 meg up to the cloud. If I have 100 people access those cameras, that site is only pushing 8 meg up.
Right.
Everything else is done in the centralized data center. It's not.
They're not hitting down.
They're not hitting the camera 100 times. They're hitting the cloud, and the cloud is then rebroadcasting that out. So you actually can use a lot less bandwidth in cloud if you have a lot of concurrent users and they're hitting it all the time off site.
Gotcha.
So it's one I want to make sure people.
It's really being aware of the limitations on the traditional side of things. It's not that you can't make multi-user work. It's just be aware of the limitations as you're working with your customers on the right solution.
Absolutely. Right? In terms of the access type with traditional, you're going to have to get remote access one way. There's 2 traditional ways people use that. There's port forwarding. You set port rules in the firewall to get access, or using, say, our peer-to-peer service, which allows you to kind of do some firewall hole punching. Port forwarding not as secure as you would like. You're putting holes in the firewall that's dual communication in and out. So if you're putting that in an environment, you got to be aware that may cause the customer to be out of compliance depending upon their industry. Peer-to-peer is a little more secure. Peer-to-peer is a little more limited in what it can and can't do, and that's just because traditionally peer-to-peer is designed for mobile access. So while people can use it at the ACMS, you lose some key functionality in terms of looking at events and how you export video. It's just a different experience.
But that's the way most people are looking at it, right?
Exactly.
On mobile. So
Mobile's the most common.
That's why that popped up. We didn't put VPN up here, just because these are the most, port forwarding and P2P are the ones we talk to our dealer partners most about. If the customer has the wherewithal and the IT staff and resources to build the VPN, they want to deal with some slower performance. That is absolutely the most secure methodology, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
From a traditional perspective.
At that point, it's an encrypted tunnel into the building. It's like you're on the same network. So, at that point, that you're not having to worry about the firewall at all. So that is the most secure, but it's not something your average user is going to set up in their business. Correct. Unless they're doing a lot of remote access concurrent. No one's going to set up a VPN just for security. Typically, it's going to be a shared VPN service, and usually only larger corporations are paying for that on a regular basis.
But you mentioned tunneling in, so all three of those methods are really an incoming stream, and with cloud, it's just going out.
It's out. So with cloud, it's an encrypted outbound transmission. We encrypt it as soon as the camera hits the cloud. It's an encrypted TLS session, so there's an endpoint connection that no one else can get on. And then once it gets to the cloud, it's encrypted for storage, and then all access to the cloud is encrypted connection as well. So it's a lot more secure, and you don't have to do any extra programming. It's just you plug in a camera, you connect it. You don't have to worry about messing with the customer's router, their firewall.
It does it all for you.
It does it all for you. In terms of the access for that, that's why we call the remote access for embedded. We list that typically as low to medium secure. It depends on how you deploy it. With cloud, inherently it's going to be ultra secure because we do it for you as part of the setup. And then account management, just to reiterate, our Alibi recorders have 32 total users. One of those is taken as the super admin already, so it's 31 additional credentials. You can set profiles and you can do granular permissions on a per camera basis on the traditional system. So you can do a lot of things with credential management. You're just limited on the number, and you're also limited in the fact that you're doing that per location. So it's a lot more time consuming if you've got a lot. With cloud, it's unlimited. And then make sure that you remember, it's changing at the device level.
Gotcha. So when we talk about multi-user and we talk about the questions that we want to ask, first and foremost, how many total users, right? And then you get into, well, how many of those users are we going to want access to that video at any given time? Because that helps us determine if we're going to be bumping up against some of those limitations from a traditional perspective. Traditional may be the absolute best solution for them.
Absolutely.
But we need to ask those questions first and foremost, right? And as we're talking about users accessing video, especially remotely, then we need to talk about bandwidth. We need to have that hard conversation with people that says, okay, if you're going to have a bunch of remote access users, let's talk about bandwidth and figure out if we're going to run into limitations there. And then how important is credential management? Like we talked about, having that one pane where you can manage all users by camera, you can build schedules by user and do it all in one place and not have to push that down to the box. That may be something that the customer really wants because they're going to have one person who's responsible for it, and they need it to be super easy, right?
Absolutely.
That's where you get into identifying which solution is going to be right. And when we talk about applications, I think there are some clear-cut applications, that you mentioned before. I think, daycare is absolutely one where, from a user perspective, multi-users, depending on the number of students, 2 parents per student, multiply that times the students, there's a big user base. And because kids leave frequently, you're having to do a lot of user management on those devices, right? Especially on the traditional side of things. So this gives you a lot of flexibility to easy setup and disable users as they come and go. Why don't you talk about some of the other ones that we've run into?
Yeah, so, pet boarding facilities is a big one.
You don't think about that.
You don't think about it a lot, but a lot of people board their dogs, their animals. They want to see them while they're on vacation. They're babies. Right. My dog's one of my children.
That's right.
When you think about all of that just being there, it's kind of like if I've got 30 bays and I'm going to get access to 30 people, while that still may be able to be handled on the credential limit of a traditional, that's 30 people logging in using upload speed out of that site. So you're going to have a pretty big internet connection to be able to do that. But when it comes to being able to manage that credential, knowing that you can just click a button and choose a camera from one place, it's a lot faster and easier if you can do that. Now, if you've got a bigger facility, you may have 100 people that want access to a different camera.
Right.
Cloud is inherently easier to do that. But assisted living facilities where you want to keep an eye on your parents or elderly relatives, one camera here and there, it's easier for them to manage. It also meets, privacy rules and compliance because of the way that we can stream the video up and we can limit access. There is no monitor in the facility other than a computer. So there's rules around who can see what. That makes it a lot easier. Schools that, again, like daycare schools, they've got a lot of cameras, a lot of access, and it's becoming a bigger trend where these early education facilities are wanting to put cameras in classrooms.
Yeah, I don't know any that don't have them now.
Parents, the parents ask, hey, can I check in on my child?
Right.
They want to make sure that their kid's in a safe environment when they're putting them in a daycare facility.
Right. And with that multi-user functionality in Alibi Cloud, giving Keith the ability to see into that daycare to a specific camera in a specific room is super easy, right? You don't have to have access to all the cameras in the daycare facility. I can just give you access to that one. Then as your child moves to the next room, we disable that camera and we turn on the other camera. So it's super, super easy to manage credential management and user management. And then, as people leave, like I think the pet boarding facility is an interesting one, right?
That's in and out. You're there for a week and then you're done.
Exactly,
or a day,
but then you don't have to get rid of that credential. You can just disable it, and then the next time they bring their dog, you enable that user again. The same scheduling, the same camera access comes up, or if they're in a different area, you can change camera access. So it just gives you a lot of flexibility in that one user interface. So hopefully, as we talked about multi-site and multi-user, and we've kind of covered traditional versus cloud, this helps you guys understand some of the kind of key probing questions that we need to ask our customers as we're going out and talking to them about their solutions. Multi-site, and multi-user, we need to be really cognizant of any limitations from a traditional perspective. We need to understand their budget, right? If they're looking for lower upfront costs and really good flexibility down the road, cloud may be a great solution. If they're looking to just be one and done and we don't have limitations that we're going to be running into, and they just want to have that maybe a larger upfront cost and they're okay with that, then traditional may be absolutely perfect for them. So what we want to know as we end this webinar is, let us know what other topics you want us to cover as it relates to cloud versus traditional. We want to make sure we're addressing your needs as we go out and sell security solutions to customers, right? Our account managers are on standby all day long to answer any questions you have about cloud. We know this is fairly new. We've been at it for 6 months. We've been putting together these webinars as we've been getting feedback from our dealers on key questions, key facets of that solution and how it relates to traditional, but more importantly, let us hear from you. Also, I'm going to always put a plug in for our YouTube channel. Go out to YouTube. We have tons of webinars that we've already published out there. We've got tons of great content about cloud, the features and functionality. Make sure you go out and not only just view those videos, but subscribe. Every time we add a new video, you'll get a notification so you'll know there's new content out there. Any other topics you want us to cover that's not cloud related, we want to know those too. Our goal is to make sure we're educating, helping you guys do a great job on identifying customer needs and selling the right solutions to your customers so they're extremely happy. We appreciate everybody joining us today. We'll see you next time on the webinar series. And thanks, Keith. We appreciate you being here, buddy.
My pleasure.